We're back with the NFL Week 18 recap, starting out with the Seahawks and Rams and the luster of this game. The potential luster of this game, anyways, was lost as soon as the Rams won their matchup on Saturday night against the Cardinals last week, knocking the Seahawks out via the strength of victory metric. So, naturally, the Rams decided, with their team firmly in the division lead and in the playoffs at the 3 seed prior to the start of the game, they would sit their players. And they really did try to play some fucking games, I'll tell you what. They noted that they were going to start Jimmy Garoppolo among other second string, third string players on the offensive side. It looks like they played most of their starting defenders. I guess Kobe Turner might have been out with something. But either way, I was saying this the whole time, there's no way you could go out this season losing to the Rams twice and allowing them to go into the playoffs on a positive streak. There had to be some way to affect their momentum going into the playoffs. And so, for better or for worse, I suppose, that's exactly what would happen. Both teams would start off the game by punting the ball before the Seahawks would drop down the field with a few Zach Charbonnet runs, and it was capped off eventually with the help of Jake Bobo getting in for a 4-yard touchdown to start Geno Smith scoring. In the general scoring in the game, the Rams would quickly respond with a field goal after some catches from Tre'Davious Atwell from some reason. The Seahawks would then open the second quarter with yet another score, this time a pass over the middle and in the back of the end zone to DK Metcalf after Geno Smith miraculously spun out of a sack attempt by, I believe it was Braden Fisk, trying to make the play. He made a very good move to get out of there and delivered an absolute rocket down the field to put the Seahawks up 14-3. That wouldn't last for too much longer, though, as Tyler Higbee would try to one-up that with a shorter 6-yard catch from Jimmy Garoppolo to make it a 14-10 ball game. The Seahawks would then open it up 17-10 after they stole out inside Rams territory, despite a few good plays to start out that drive. There would be some good fortune there, though, as within the first 3 plays of the Rams' next drive, Jimmy Garoppolo would throw an interception to Julian Love. So the Seahawks had yet another chance to expand on their lead, but they would also go 3-and-out, giving the Rams a chance with just 53 seconds left to drop down the field a little bit, get some points on the board. And after a 31-yard catch by Demarcus Robinson on 3rd and short, they were able to get into Seahawks territory where Josh Carty, the rookie from Stanford, managed to get the 58-yard field goal to go and make it a 17-13 ball game. The Seahawks would once again get the ball to start out the second half, but would stall out going 3-and-out on their first drive, letting the Rams respond with yet another field goal of their own. This time, Carty would make it from 57 yards. Then, on the ensuing drive, there would be a 3rd and long in Seattle's territory, and it looked as though Jackson Smith-Njigba was dead to rights on a very short catch out of the backfield until he lateraled it over to Zach Charbonnet on an immaculate hook and ladder that picked up 32 yards and got the Seahawks in territory to extend the drive and allow them to eventually get the touchdown here. This one scored by none other than Michigan alum, I guess, and rookie tight end A.J. Barner to open up the lead 24-16. The Rams would try to one-up that drive with a drawn-out possession of their own, getting some contributions from the likes of Ronnie Rivers and Jordan Whittington, where on 2nd and goal, they would get it into Tyler Johnson and would fail the 2-point conversion, allowing the Seahawks to remain up by 2. But after a 3-and-out and a favorable Rams drive that saw them get another field goal from Josh Carty, who would finish the game with 4 on the day. The Seahawks were kind of backed into a corner. Naturally, it is a little weird that you're having the second teamers come in and give you this good of a fight. But if anything, it does help the Rams recognize that they do have some death pieces in the long run. I mean, you're doing this against starting caliber players for the Seahawks defensive unit especially. So, while it is a throwaway game, it can't necessarily be denied that they did play well. I'll have to give credit where credit is due. But ultimately, if the Seahawks wanted to close out on the right note, they needed a clutch drive. And a clutch drive is exactly what they would get. Now, there was a bit of disaster as Kenny McIntosh would actually fumble, but it was offset by an offsides penalty. After that, though, they were able to keep the drive going with runs from Zach Charbonnet and a couple catches by the likes of A.J. Barner and Tyler Lockett. Then, on first down inside the Rams' red zone, Geno Smith would deliver a very dangerous pass, I'll say, to Noah Fant as he would try to get the touchdown and got flipped completely, hitting his head on the turf. Now, it looked like he was fine afterwards, but they had to check it because they were deeming that the ball may have been short of the line to gain, or short of the goal line. But after further review, they would determine that he did cross the line to gain and scored a touchdown, giving the Seahawks a 30-25 lead. The Rams did still have a chance. They had 3 minutes and 19 seconds to work with and some timeouts at their disposal. But ultimately, despite them trying their absolute hardest to extend the drive on multiple fourth down conversions, the final one would see them fail as the pass to Jordan Whittington would be incomplete, and thus the Seahawks would end the game and their season, getting the 30-25 victory against the Rams here. This would set precedent for Mike Macdonald becoming the winningest Seattle head coach in history in their first season, passing the likes of Chuck Knox and also the, polarizing head coaching figure in Mike Holmgren. Geno Smith would also, with this game here, break his previous single-season franchise record with the team in passing yardage and pass completions on the season. In this one, he had 74.1% completion percentage with 223 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. While Zach Charbonnet added 59 yards on the ground, Noah Fant had 63 yards and 5 catches with the aforementioned touchdown, along with DK Metcalf getting 53 yards on 3 catches and a touchdown also. Jimmy Garoppolo, for his part, did about what you would expect him to do in a spot role. I mean, 334 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception for him is quite all right. And I mean, when you really look at it, he did have this team of backups in winning position. So you have to credit him with that, even though you're definitely going to have to accept the fact that you lost the game. Because there's no way it makes any sense to lose to that motherfucker. Jordan Whittington would add 5 total touches for 98 yards, and Demarcus Robinson would have 72 yards receiving on 3 catches. Moving on to the Browns versus Ravens matchup on Saturday. And despite what you may think about the Browns, this game did have some importance if you were really unsure. as the Ravens would need to win this game to secure their division title. They already had a playoff berth, but their chances of winning the division were still in limbo prior to the start of this game. It was still common knowledge that they would probably get the job done, even with them having the precedent of losing to the Browns in heartbreaking fashion earlier this season. This is a totally different ball game. They started off the game with punts, though I was not necessarily watching the game at that specific point of time. But I did start watching on the Browns' second drive when I noticed, for whatever reason, that Bailey Zappi was with them. And that's when I knew that it was done. Like, they were probably finished before the game even started, but the fact that I didn't even know they acquired Bailey Zappi over the course of this time, and they wanted to give him a shot because Dorian Thompson-Robinson was that terrible as a starter, and they did not want to give Jameis Winston another opportunity to work with as well, seeing as he is so turnover prone also. Maybe they have something in Bailey Zappi, right? Instead, what they would get is this man on the second play of that drive, throwing an interception right into the hands of rookie cornerback Nate Wiggins. And he would get a pick six to open up the scoring in the game. But seemingly, that's all the Ravens could really do. I mean, it was not hard for their defense to get stops, obviously, with a quarterback like that in the backfield, right? Not difficult whatsoever. But the Ravens were not able to finish their own drives. I mean, in some cases, they would have multiple drops on some elite passes from Lamar Jackson, or they would just stall out on drives with very short runs. They would turn the ball over on downs on their next possession after he missed a pass to Derrick Henry inside Cleveland's 10-yard line. In came Dorian Thompson-Robinson again for the Browns, and they would punt the football. Their quarterback situation is just completely terrible. Like, you don't even really have anywhere to turn to right now. And when I detail what I will later, this isn't even the worst of it. That's really all I can say. Now, the Ravens would take this opportunity to finally do what they do best. They got Derrick Henry involved in the rushing attack and in the passing game before Zay Flowers would continue to make short catches and try his absolute hardest to extend plays when he doesn't need to. I promise you this man still hasn't learned his lesson. But on that same drive, you would have them get closer into the red zone, and then Mark Andrews would get a great catch in the back of the end zone from 12 yards out to give Baltimore the 14-0 lead. The Browns would somehow respond with a field goal, but nobody worried about that. In their next drive, they would go 3 and out, giving the Ravens multiple possessions to go and increase the lead around that time. And both of them saw them turn the ball over on downs, with an incomplete pass by Lamar Jackson on the first, and then another incomplete pass by Lamar Jackson on the next. 14-3 lead going into the half, and not saying at all that the Browns had a chance. At no point, even with what was going on, did it feel like the Browns were going to come back and win this ball game. But you could argue that the Ravens were truly shooting themselves in the foot. They had chance after chance to convert, and they just weren't. That would change to start out the third quarter immediately. They would get right into it with the help of Isaiah Likely, and also a deep pass to Mark Andrews for 30 yards before Lamar Jackson would just buy time in the pocket, along with the help of Derrick Henry getting a clean block on the free man before Lamar Jackson fired it into the end zone and then turned around like it was a no-look jumper to an open Rashad Bateman in the back of the end zone for an easy score. Both teams in the rest of this third quarter would trade punt after punt after punt after punt before the Browns would get the ball back going into the fourth quarter. There was a lot of uncertainty on this drive, especially around the likes of Brandon Stephens. There's one thing we know about him, it's that he will get picked on at will. Like, even with a rookie in Nate Wiggins being easy pickings, every single team seems to be able to get it right on Brandon Stephens all the time. Like, quite literally, to open up this drive, the Browns weren't on much of anything. But then you have Brandon Stephens allowing them to, on third down, extend their drive by committing pass interference on Jerry Jeudy, just completely grabbing him and trying to turn him around, denying him any chance of coming back to the football, and the Browns are granted another first down. Then a couple plays later, this man allows James Thrash to get in the end zone for what was believed to be a toe-tap touchdown catch in the back of the end zone, or on the boundaries. Luckily for him, they overturned it because he didn't maintain full possession of the ball after Brandon Stephens managed to knock it out of his hands just before he went completely out of bounds. That could have gone either way, and I was even of the belief that it may have been a touchback, which would have been a typical Cleveland Browns play in this era, but that's besides the point. The Browns would be forced into second down, but they would ultimately go at Brandon Stephens again, where on 3rd and 9, he allowed Jordan Akins to get in for a 16-yard touchdown. He is an absolute cone, and they target him at will. They don't care what the situation truly is. They're going to find a way to get him the football or attack him every time. You can bank on that shit. Still, that touchdown didn't really do the Browns any good. Again, not like it invoked fear in the hearts of anybody, because on their next drive, they would just feed it to Rashad Bateman for a couple of plays that picked up 44 combined yards, and then got it out of the backfield to Patrick Ricard, who nearly scored a touchdown himself, managing to pick up 14 yards somehow. Then Derrick Henry would punch it in from 2 yards out. Pretty easy. As, with him scoring that touchdown, he would become the first NFL player with 3 seasons of 1,500 rushing yards and 15 or more touchdowns. Not to mention that the Ravens were in prime position to secure their 11th instance in this season of having a 100-yard margin of difference in the rushing attack. They're going to outrun you at their core. That is their identity. And when they're working with that at 100% at full capacity, it's unstoppable stuff. The Browns would then turn the ball over on downs on their next possession, and then it was the Derrick Henry show from there, as he would get a 43-yard rushing touchdown within the first 3 plays of the drive to end the scoring, basically end the game for the Ravens. Of course, the Browns, who have literally nothing to lose and nothing to give a fuck about anymore because their season's a wrap, they're still going to try to drive down and make something happen. With a couple passes to Jerry Jeudy, they were in position to score something. But an errant decision by Bailey Zappi would allow big fat Michael Pierce, the D tackle, to come out of the backfield and put a stop to any of that. as he would catch an interception, and then to avoid running at his size all the way down the field, he decided to just give himself up and ultimately end the game. I mean, you would see the Ravens punt the ball again, but ultimately that was it. It got to the point where even the Browns decided, you know what, we're better off just taking a fucking knee at that point. When you force the opposing team, not yourself, the opposing team, to kneel, that is the ultimate sign of defeat right there. Is Bailey Zappi would take one. Like, you know at that point that you aren't even better off trying to run a legitimate play to try and drive yourself down the field to accomplish something on the drive, because you proceeded to throw a pick to a D tackle that stands at around 350 plus pounds. It's embarrassing stuff. And it all just continues for the Browns, really. I mean, you would have Zappi step in and complete just 51.6% of his passes, throwing those 2 interceptions and just 1 touchdown. They have no rushing game right now. They combined for 19 rushes and just 56 yards on 2.9 yards a carry. It's fucking atrocious. The Ravens, meanwhile, dominated. I mean, Lamar Jackson, just 50% completion, 217 yards and 2 touchdowns to go along with 63 rushing yards. It wasn't anything to write home about, but I'll tell you this, he could get away with it against such a trash team. It also helps that Derrick Henry would add 138 yards on the ground to go along with 2 rushing touchdowns on 20 carries. Rashad Bateman would lead all receivers in the game with 76 receiving yards on 5 catches and a touchdown. And Mark Andrews would have 54 yards on 4 catches for a touchdown as well. Moving on to the Bengals and Steelers game. This one was slated to be a little more, I guess, interesting. A lot more compelling than the Browns-Ravens matchup. And it makes sense. You have the Steelers needing to at least win and have the Ravens lose somehow to secure their division in the AFC North as well. But again, naturally, with them losing, at the very least, you're just trying to get a win so you can break this losing streak against playoff caliber teams. As for the Bengals, they would need to win out, and they would also need help from multiple teams on Sunday to get into the playoffs. So there was a lot of business to be handled. And it seemed like the Bengals were going to get right into it. I mean, you got Joe Burrow just carving up the defense on this first drive as he would deliver dots to the outside to T. Higgins. Mike Gesicki over the middle getting involved, and then Jamar Chase would get 3 straight catches to close out the drive as he would get a 12-yard touchdown catch to give the Bengals a 7-0 lead. The Steelers must not have gotten the memo because they allowed Trey Hendrickson, the then sack leader in the NFL, to crash in from the outside and get straight to Russell Wilson to sack him and force them into a 3-and-out. The Bengals would do a similar thing here. They would take 6 minutes and 23 seconds off the clock, just driving down the field as meticulously as they possibly could, even trying their hardest to get Khalil Herbert involved when it just was no bueno, really. I mean, he got a few solid catches and a few solid carries, but when you really think about it, this is the dude that coming into this game had just 54 yards combined in 8 overall appearances for the Bengals this season. And it's not like he was just getting a few carries here and there. No, he was getting legitimate touches. And he's appeared in every single one of those football games and has done absolutely nothing. Now, Joe Burrow would fumble the football on this 3rd and 6, but Herbert would actually make himself useful and recover it to give the Bengals a chance to kick the field goal, and they would do exactly that. Skate York would make it from 48 yards out. It was looking even worse for the Steelers on this drive as they were behind schedule with the likes of Trey Hendrickson getting involved again, and also Najee Harris just continuing to lack the true ball carrier vision that a running back should have. But nonetheless, on this 3rd and 11 to close out the first quarter, Russell Wilson would throw a signature pass to Mike Williams, who would reel it in, get both of his feet down in time, and give the Steelers a sign of life. Jaylen Warren would then try to resuscitate things, and Najee Harris would learn from his counterpart, rushing it all the way down the field before Najee Harris would punch it in from a yard out to give the Steelers a 7-10 margin to work with. The Bengals would then turn the ball over on downs. Was looking rather fine for the Steelers here until you realize that they would go 3 and out as well. Luckily for them, though, they would get kind of fortunate. I mean, you would have them punt the ball once more, but this time they would have Calvin Austin III muff the punt, forced by one of their players, and Akeem Davis-Gaither would recover the fumble. They were on the Steelers' 33-yard line with a chance to do great work. And yet, that wouldn't happen at all. Within just a few plays, they would pick up a first down, luckily, after a potential Joe Burrow fumble. And then, just a few plays after that, you would have a pass get tipped up, and it was intercepted by undrafted rookie Beanie Bishop Jr. to give the Steelers the ball back yet again. The Steelers would then proceed to turn the ball over on downs, spotting the Bengals another easy possession after another predictable 4th down call from them, which has been a theme of some of these losses too. You're trying to be aggressive, but your play calling is just the same boring, tired out concept over and over and over again. Trying to run it up the middle all the time. You know they're going to account for that. You don't find another way to make the play there. You just want to run it straight up the middle where every single person is coming for the running back at that point. There's just no reason to do that. I guess you got to take it up with them. The Bengals would promptly score a field goal here, and that would end the half with the Bengals having a 6-point lead. There would be a good amount of metrics displayed here. For example, it would be noted as the Steelers were continuing to slide in the second quarter that they had the worst point differential, or the second worst point differential in the league in the first quarter. All of these slow starts, especially in these games against the playoff caliber teams, have hurt them. And you have to recognize this as an organization, that you don't necessarily start off hot in these games, and more often than not, it has led you to lose multiple winnable ball games this season. You don't think that the formula for your opening drive script or so should be changed up if you're going to keep on settling for wasted possession after wasted possession early and then getting behind, having to always battle back. Doesn't work. Also, there was potential with another graphic that Cincinnati could have the first NFL team ever to have a league leader in passing yards, which would be Joe Burrow, a league leader in receiving yards, which would be Jamar Chase, and a league leader in sacks, which would be Trey Hendrickson. If they were to keep that up, that would be immaculate history. But you got to make it count. The third quarter would see the Steelers punt the ball on 3 and out, with a 3 and out yet again. Despite solid contributions from the likes of Preston Smith and TJ Watt, the Bengals would ultimately have to settle for a field goal after Nate Herbig would get a sack on Joe Burrow. The Steelers would then punt the ball again. Your defense is doing their absolute best to keep it in it, despite them allowing that hot start from the Bengals to open up the game. This is the allure of the Steelers defense. Even with them taking 8 minutes and 31 seconds off the clock and getting 82 yards on this drive, they were stopped in a goal-to-go situation. And Kate York would kick another field goal. The Steelers would then finally wake up a little bit with the help of 3 straight completed passes to Van Jefferson, and then some involvement from Najee Harris before Russell Wilson would take it upon himself. So he would scramble for a 12-yard gain and then ultimately deliver a pass to an open Pat Freiermuth in the flat for a 19-yard touchdown. After a couple of punts were traded, the Bengals would eventually get the ball back, or so it was believed, before, I believe, one of their gunners actually had the football on this punt go off of his back foot. Seeing this, Connor Hayward would manage to fall on the ball and give the Steelers a chance at an easy score. Naturally, you would want a touchdown here. But on a drive that saw them get just 2 yards on 6 plays, we're accounting for some penalties and losses, they would manage to get Chris Boswell to kick a 54-yard field goal and have it go in. The Bengals would then punt again, giving the Steelers yet another chance, and then things got truly, truly bad. Truthfully bad. I mean, yes, it didn't help that Najee Harris would be banged up a little bit, but you still needed to focus on calling this drive the right way, getting out of bounds, and you needed to doing your best to conserve your timeouts to get Chris Boswell in range, because he is money from 50 plus throughout his career, and you just saw him make one. But clearly the players didn't understand. This short pass would see them lose yardage and waste enough time for them to call their next play 21 seconds later. Then Pat Freiermuth would get one that yet again saw them waste 21 more seconds. Their next play, which would be a 17-yard catch to pick up a first down, would see them waste another 23 seconds before Russell Wilson decided to run but not get out of bounds, which wasted 19 seconds. And people were definitely in a flux about this. Even I, in the moment, Russell Wilson is my guy, my favorite player, but I cannot logically defend that. I can't. You're on one timeout. You're getting that close. Just do your best to get out of bounds. Instead, he wanted to show, I guess, that he could pick up extra yardage. Like, you don't necessarily need it there. And if you're going to do it, you got to be smart about it. At least get closer to the boundary so that you have a better chance of being tackled out of bounds and stopping the clock. You know that they're going to try to play the boundaries. They're not going to just hand it to you. You have to force their hand. Well, Russell Wilson would fail to do that. Then, a few plays after that, you would see him get sacked by Trey Hendrickson yet again, and then miss a pass to George Pickens, who I'll get to George Pickens in just a bit. In just a little bit. But look. On that fourth down, you would have him miss the pass to Pat Freiermuth, and that would ultimately end the ball game, giving the Bengals a 19-17 win and temporarily keeping their playoff hopes alive. Joe Burrow would throw a shit ton of passes in 46, but complete 80.4% of them. Had 277 yards and a touchdown pass along with the interception. Khalil Herbert would have his most productive game, I would think, of this season, getting 69 yards on the ground, though 3.4 yards per carry is terrible. Jamar Chase would have 10 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. And Mike Gesicki would add 68 yards on 8 receptions. As for the Steelers, Russell Wilson would have 148 yards on 54.8% completion and a touchdown. The Steelers are still struggling to run the football. I mean, 23 rushes total for 74 yards on 3.2 yards per carry. You're not going to win a game like that, especially this kind of ball game that wants you, requires you to win the ball game at the line of scrimmage in the trenches. And you lost that battle completely here. Or did not do enough with the potential win that you could have had in this aspect. Pat Freiermuth would have 85 yards on 8 catches and a touchdown. No other wide receiver would have exactly over 25, as Mike Williams would have the 125-yard reception, and that was it for him. But George Pickens is the biggest story here because he went absolutely ghost. He didn't do a damn thing. He had a single catch for no gain while adding 3 drops on 6 targets. And I kid you not, he was getting into it with fans in the stadium, trying to egg them on to come on down and box him up or some shit like that. All his teammates, like Pat Freiermuth, I guess, Russell Wilson, trying to talk to him, trying to get that man to lock in to the game because it absolutely mattered. And yet you're focused on so much other shit that you failed to truly show up when it counted. They absolutely needed George Pickens to contribute something of worth in this ball game if they wanted to come out on top and prevent the Bengals from even having a shot at all to make the playoffs still. But he failed to do his job. It's unfortunate. And the Steelers as well. This is 4 straight games now where you've lost to playoff caliber opponents. Now this one was a bit closer, but you underwhelmed completely on offense despite chance after chance after chance. So not only do the Steelers fail to even go into the playoffs on positive momentum, becoming the 3rd team in NFL history to drop 4 or more straight ball games going into the playoffs, but they were also in danger of messing up their seeding. They were also in danger of messing up their seeding if things would go a certain way on Sunday. Alright, given that a good amount of these games have implications for seeding, I'm just going to go through the slate in chronological order, though I'll still account for all the games that I actually watched. So, we're going to start out with this one in the Commanders and Cowboys, and let's just say that things got way more interesting than they honestly should have been at this point. Now, Micah Parsons would start out the game with a couple sacks on this first drive against Jaden Daniels, which would set a milestone for him as he would become the 4th player to log at least 10 or more sacks in each of their first 4 seasons. And that's where it should count. You should be trying to make these statements with your play rather than just trying to get different buzz quotes by a podcast or interviews and things like that. You got to make it happen on the football field, or otherwise it's not going to mean much of anything. Now, with that, the Cowboys would manage to get the ball back, and they would actually give Trey Lance a shot. And, I mean, I guess other people have alluded to it, but I guess, I would be of a similar belief in the fact that they would state that this is Trey Lance's first start in over 2 seasons, as he was injured in early 2022, ironically enough, against the Seahawks. Yeah, he went out in that game and has not necessarily been given much of a chance since then. Even in this season, he was given opportunities off the bench, few and far between for the Cowboys. But the priority was to have Cooper Rush in and try to mount together some wins. I really don't know. It's like, yes, with Jerry Jones, he's certainly all about the money, more so than winning. But if you really think about it, you have a great asset in Trey Lance. A younger quarterback, a project quarterback, but he needs the development. You'd figure that you would want to take the time out, especially in a situation where Dak Prescott goes down and is out for the season, to try and finally see what you have in him. Because honestly, there's no telling where his value stands at this current point if you're going to let him rot on the bench, and it could honestly decrease with that. But you gave up a good amount to San Francisco to acquire him. And you are not making the most of it when you probably should. Again, yes, whenever Dak Prescott's in and ready to go, obviously, it's his team. You have no choice after granting that man the contract you did. But in starts where you would need a backup quarterback to step up into the mantle, why not give it? Why not give it to Trey Lance beforehand, prior to the final game of the season, with nothing on the line whatsoever? Like, you think you can just go ahead and determine how good of an asset Trey Lance could be for you off of just one start the entire time he's been there? That's just horrible. A horrible move for business, to be completely honest. But he was, to his credit, doing well. After a couple of handoffs to Rico Donnell, he would actually get some pretty fun passes to start out the drive. He would hit Jalen Tolbert for 31 and then Kevontae Turpin for 33, both of them being incredibly deep passes. They would ultimately stall out, though, in Washington's red zone and have Brandon Aubrey kick a field goal. With this one, he would also set a milestone, as well as he would break his own record of field goals in a season for a Cowboys kicker, with 37 at that point. Ridiculous. Now, the Commanders would get the ball back, and Jaden Daniels would take it upon himself to run a couple of times before getting Terry McLaurin the ball a little bit before missing him, and then getting sacked by Donovan Wilson. As the Commanders would punt the football again, Cowboys would do the same thing, and then the Commanders would do it once more. The Cowboys would get the ball back, and after a few solid plays, Trey Lance would ultimately miss Brandon Cooks on third down, giving the Commanders the ball back, but Jamison Crowder, the punt returner, would muff the catch in the Cowboys stadium, giving the Cowboys a chance at the ball. A full circle moment and a reversal of fortune for a Cowboys team that suffered a loss in Monday Night Football in early December to a team who had a similar thing pan out for them. That is neither here nor there. They wouldn't do anything with it, though. They, in fact, lost yardage on this drive and were forced to get Brandon Aubrey another shot at kicking the football. So the Cowboys would have a 6-0 lead after this drive. The Commanders were just not really getting anything to go. Credit to the Cowboys defense. They were getting enough pressure on him, and it seemed like they were doing relatively well on the back end to prevent Jayden Daniels from trying to make plays that weren't necessarily there. You're either going to take what we give you, or you're not going to have anything at all. He found himself in that dilemma more often than not, and the Commanders would punt the ball again here. With the Cowboys then trying to mount a drive, they would fail to do so after a false start penalty on one of the more penalized guards in the league in Tyler Guyton. Yes, that is true. They would note that on the broadcast, and then would proceed to have Rico Dowdle lose yardage before Trey Lance would throw 2 straight incompletions and give the ball back to the Commanders. This time, they would actually go down the field and score. It took quite a little bit, but they would have a chance to get on the board. And Zane Gonzalez would do exactly that from 47 yards out. Cowboys saw a grand opportunity to take advantage, and that they would try to do. They got very random receivers involved. Jonathan Mingo and Ryan Flournoy would see themselves get back-to-back catches before Hunter Lepke on 4th and short would extend the drive with a fullback dive. Trey Lance would also hit Rico Dowdle up on multiple occasions before rushing the ball a couple of times and getting deeper into Washington's red zone. Now, on 3rd and goal from this range, he would miss Brandon Cooks after Sandersville made a great play on the ball, and the Cowboys would then go for it on 4th down where he rolled out and almost made a great pass, but it ended up being just short of a diving Rico Dowdle, who tried to adjust to the ball and failed to do so, bringing the end of the half in and giving the Cowboys a 3-point lead. Cowboys would then open up the scoring in the 3rd quarter with yet another field goal, as Brandon Aubrey would get this one from 36. And then the Commanders would get the ball back, but they would do something really interesting. You see, Jayden Daniels, I believe they said he was 6 of 12 for 38 yards or so in the first half. He wasn't necessarily performing well, but they were viewing the next game that I'll be talking about on this. They were seeing how different players were getting affected in those conditions, and they decided to be content with where they were at. Dan Quinn ultimately made the decision to sit Jayden Daniels to secure his health and be sure that they were at their absolute best going into next week. Knowing that Jayden Daniels has turned them around this much, they could not afford to see him get affected in any way, shape, or form. They needed to protect him, so in came Marcus Mariota, and he actually made plays, man. Olamide Zaccheaus, for example, was struggling all game to haul in simple catches, but managed to get a 29-yard one from Marcus Mariota, which would bring them inside Dallas's red zone, where he would hit up Zach Ertz for a 5-yard touchdown, extending, yet another drive here and getting on the board. Down 1, the Cowboys would get the ball back and would take it into the 4th quarter with a 6-minute and 14-second drive that would see Trey Lance do his absolute best to lead them down the field, and ultimately, the Cowboys would get yet another field goal. They would have no other choice, as they would try to punch it in from short before getting back-to-back incomplete passes. Nonetheless, they were up by 2 when the Commanders would have Marcus Mariota continuing to play out of his mind. He would hit up Zaccheaus again and then take time out to run the football, getting Terry McLaurin involved as well. Then, in another goal-to-go situation from the 5-yard line, he would run it in himself Wild work. Marshawn Nealon would be the victim on the play, as he would just completely get trucked by him. Alright. Now again, the Cowboys had optimal time to make something happen. They would do just that. Jalen Tolbert would get a 32-yard gain to get them even more active on this drive. And after a pass interference on Jonathan Mingo from none other than Benjamin St. Juste. Look, man. They were in prime position to score. They would kind of waste their first couple runs, though, trying a fullback dive and then trying another run up the middle, but failing to get in. Then Rico Donnell would get the 2-yard gain to get in the red zone and give the Cowboys a 19-16 lead. The Commanders would punt yet again after a couple of sacks on Marcus Mariota with contribution from Chauncey Golston and also Osa Odighizuwa. Cowboys would then get the ball back, and with the opening tackle on this drive from none other than Bobby Wagner, he would actually accomplish a feat of his own, as he would become the player with the 4th most tackles in NFL history, along with the likes of London Fletcher, Ray Lewis, Lawrence Taylor. That would vaunt the Commanders' defense to step it up. They would stop Trey Lance just short of the line to gain and force him into a delay of game after that play, allowing the Commanders one more shot. And damn, would they make it count. Now, it took a little bit. They would have to be very methodical. Terry McLaurin would only get a short gain here, followed up by another 6-yard catch. They would then try to get Austin Eckler going before another Terry McLaurin catch. And this is where he would activate himself. But not after a couple of runs for Marcus Mariota that picked up 34 total yards, including a 33-yard gain on 4th and 1 to keep the drive going and their chance at victory alive. He would then pass the ball to Zach Ertz for 11 yards, get them down to Dallas' 5-yard line. Now, I was thinking that they were going to try to kick a field goal, but it's like, they got to assume their power over the Cowboys, right? I was kind of shocked initially that they were going to go for it. I guess I understood it, and it paid off. It paid off. Because Marcus Mariota would deliver an absolute heave to Terry McLaurin, who would get it right over DaRon Bland when it counted. He had been quiet for most of the game, but when it counted, he mossed DaRon Bland in the back of the end zone and got the Commanders their 12th win of the season, giving them the 23-19 victory, and also launching him into the history books as well, as he would become the most prolific Commanders receiver in single season in terms of touchdown catches with 13. Dan Quinn would also, with the 12th win, become the very first Commanders head coach since that of Joe Gibbs in 1991 to have 12 or more wins in a season. A lot of history being made, all from a seemingly meaningless ball game. Marcus Mariota would literally step right in and have one of the best performances he's had in years. Even as being a backup on this team, he would have 161 passing yards and 56 rushing yards, while completing 83.3% of his passes and accounting for 3 total touchdowns on the day, which equaled the amount of incompletions he had overall. Terry McLaurin would have 62 yards on 8 catches and the aforementioned game-sealing touchdown, along with Zacchaeus adding 51 yards on 2 catches and 44 receiving yards for Zach Ertz to go on 5 catches and a touchdown. As for the Cowboys, all credit to Trey Lance. He played relatively well. 244 passing yards and just 58.8% completion percentage. Not necessarily the best, but for a person that is getting their first start in damn near, if we're going to be technical about it, 3 years going on, then it's like, I guess that's okay, you know? Here you go, Donald would have just 72 rushing yards on 22 carries and just 3.3 yards a carry. Not highly optimal at all. Jalen Tolbert would also add 98 receiving yards on 4 catches in this game. Moving on to the Bears-Packers game, which was taking place at around the same time. And yet another game that had no true importance in terms of affecting the playoff team, but in terms of seeding, could shake some things up. Things went a certain way, and things went horribly bad for the Packers in this one. Yes, both teams started out with punting the football, but then you would have the Packers get the ball, drive a little bit, and then punt, where a gunner or their backup cornerback in Josh Blackwell would actually manage to return it for a 94-yard touchdown. It didn't even look like he was moving with any effort, but I guess the Packers special teams is just a little slower, and so he was able to get away with it. Now, the Packers would go down and respond with a field goal. However, you would have Malik Willis come in for a play here on, I guess, a rushing attempt. Then you would have the Bears get the ball back after the field goal, and they would go 3 and out. Typical for them. Things would get a little more disastrous here for the Packers as Jaden Reed would try to take a run on, I believe, an end around, and would fumble the football with Jonathan Owens managing to get his mitts on it for the recovery after Jalen Johnson fumbled it, and it spotted the Bears another easy possession where they were able to get DeAndre Swift in from 4 yards out, giving them an 11-point lead. The Packers would drive down with the help of Jordan Love after a couple of great plays here. And then you would have Malik Willis come in after Jordan Love would get injured, as he would have an elbow injury designated after the game. They were still trying to figure it out during the game, but they would say that his funny bone was hurt. Not optimal at all for a person who's supposed to be the franchise quarterback. And also, something about those elbow injuries, too, they fucking sting. And it was right on his throwing arm. So he had to be taken out for the rest of the game. Malik Willis would come in and deliver a few good passes himself before Josh Jacobs would get in for a rushing touchdown. The Bears would then get back on the field and punt the ball. Not 3 and out, but yet another punt on the board for them. Malik Willis would lead them to a field goal drive to get them within 1 with the help of Brandon McManus. But it even looks as though on this drive, Malik Willis would also get hurt, as I believe his thumb would be injured during the course of this drive. And it's not like you have another quarterback on your roster. Those are the 2 you are dealt right now. He managed to stay in, though, and continue playing, but by this point, the Bears would go into the half with a 14-13 lead. And then start out the third quarter with Caleb Williams throwing another interception to that of Xavier McKinney. But he, again, I don't know what it is with these Packers defenders not being able to secure the ball after interceptions. Maybe they're just getting too excited. And he would fumble, having Edgerrin Cooper, though, recover it. Then on the next drive, you would have Malik Willis fumble and allow Kevin Byard to force it, allowing TJ Edwards to recover it, with the Bears still failing to do anything on that subsequent drive. Their 6-play, 11-yard drive would somehow take 4 minutes and 20 seconds off the clock. Wild situation there. The Packers would then get the ball back, try to feed Chris Brooks and Jaden Reed, but would turn it over on downs. And then the Bears, along with Cole Kmet and DJ Moore getting contributions, would ultimately end off this next drive with DJ Moore hauling in from 32 yards out and giving the Bears a 21-13 lead. They would exchange punts on very short drives before the Packers would actually get a touchdown with the help of a 21-yard rushing touchdown from that of Emmanuel Wilson. They would fail their 2-point conversion, but they had another chance as the Bears would drive and drive down the field before DJ Moore fumbled. And this time, Carrington Valentine would get his hand in to punch it out, where Javon Bullard, a rookie from Georgia, would get it, give the Packers the ball back. They didn't need to do much of anything. It was a highly inefficient job in terms of yards per play, but you're trying to get as close as you possibly can in range for Brandon McManus to make something happen. And he would, as McManus would get a 55-yarder to go. Now, the Bears are still given a good amount of time to work with. And Caleb Williams, in something that had been a struggle for him all season long, he would actually make the most of it here, as he would get a 15-yard pass to Rome Odunze, a scramble, and then another dime to DJ Moore for 18 yards, before Cairo Santos, who again infamously doesn't have the longest of legs, did manage to get it in from 51 yards out and break this losing streak for the Bears, giving them their first win in quite some time. To think that they started out the season 4-2. 4-2. And you mean to tell me that they managed to drop 12 of their last 10 of their last 11. Like, dude. Just horrible. Not to mention 10 straight. But at the very least, it's a decent way to finish out your season. Caleb Williams gets a solid game-winning drive. You have positive momentum to work with in some capacity. That's still not enough, though, for the hardcore Bears fans out there, I guess. Caleb Williams would have a touchdown and 148 passing yards on 72.4% completion, while they weirdly try to get Keenan Allen involved in the passing game for some reason, and he would subsequently throw an interception. DeAndre Swift still can't run the football again. It could be a byproduct of him not having a capable offensive line blocking for him, or it could be his own set of skills that need to be in question. Besides the point, just 3.2 yards per carry is not good. DJ Moore would have 86 receiving yards on 9 catches with a touchdown. As for the Packers, both quarterbacks would do decent work with their opportunities. Emmanuel Wilson would have 73 rushing yards on the ground with a touchdown. Josh Jacobs would have 44 yards on the ground and a touchdown on 6 carries. And Chris Brooks would even add 59 rushing yards on 8 carries in this ballgame. They could lean on it. That balance is definitely important going into the playoffs despite the loss. Malik Heath would have 53 receiving yards in this game on 3 catches as well. Tough loss for the Packers, and they would be affected in their seeding as well, given the fact that the Commanders won their game. Yeah. Yep. So, hey, you gotta take that, I guess. The Colts and Jaguars next. I guess they wanted to put it all on the line. Who is gonna battle for the number 1 overall pick, I guess? The Jaguars are trying to keep that on, I suppose, and the Colts were just trying to close out the season on a victory, especially after losing out on the chance to make the playoffs in such horrible fashion last week. They would start out just fine with Joe Flacco getting it to Alec Pierce for a 40-yard touchdown expeditiously. And the Jaguars were on the same type of thing as Tank Bigsby would manage to punch it in. But after that, a lot of punts would follow. The Colts would even turn the ball over on downs prior to the Jaguars getting a field goal from Cameron Little to give them a 3-point lead. Colts, with the help of Jonathan Taylor, and that's a lot of help for that matter, would get in with Jonathan Taylor doing it himself from 6 yards out. Jags would then go 3 and out, and the Colts would then kick a field goal with Matt Gay before they traded field goals over the stretch. And the Colts would go out of this half with a 7-point lead. Absolutely nothing happened in the third quarter. Both of them would trade punts. And then you would have Mac Jones doing Mac Jones stuff, throwing yet another interception to that of Julian Blackmon. If you remember last season, when those guys were playing against each other internationally, you had Mac Jones throw that duck of a pass to Julian Blackmon. So, I guess another full circle moment, if you will. The Colts, despite driving down the field afterwards, would miss their field goal attempt with Matt Gay. And then the Jags would punt yet again, with the Colts opening up the fourth quarter doing the same thing. The Jaguars would get the memo, though, wake up a little bit, and have Brenton Strange get involved for catches of 11 and 26 yards on this drive prior to Parker Washington getting in the end zone and tying up the ball game. They would then trade field goals. And thus, that would end up closing out regulation with a tie. The Colts would open up their own possession in this overtime period with kicking a field goal after driving down to Jacksonville's red zone. The Jags, on the other hand, bungled their drive completely. I mean, you had very short passes to Tank Bigsby for catches of, for a catch of 3 yards after a run from 1 yard out. And then Mac Jones would get sacked for 16 yards. So on 4th and 22, naturally, you've got to get desperate and dial up a heave or something. You desperately needed it. He would kind of get it to Brian Thomas Jr., but Samuel Womack III was right in the area to make the play, and he would ultimately get Brian Thomas Jr. down short of the line of gain, ending it in overtime with the Colts closing out their season with a 26-23 victory. Joe Flacco would have a touchdown and 264 passing yards in this one, while Jonathan Taylor would have 177 yards on the ground and a touchdown on 34 carries. Josh Downs will have 10 receptions for 94 yards. Michael Pittman Jr. will have 72 receiving yards on 6 receptions. And Alec Pierce will have the aforementioned touchdown to go along with 57 overall receiving yards. As for the Jags, Mac Jones will have 225 passing yards, a touchdown, and an interception on 62.5% completion. They cannot run the ball efficiently to save their lives. Just 3.3 yards per carry, once again for them. Horrible. Horrible stuff. Brian Thomas Jr. would continue to add to his exceptional rookie season as he would get 103 receiving yards on 7 catches. He again, last week, set the Jags rookie receiver franchise record. And it goes to waste because there's not consistent enough quarterback play and the overall team is just bad. So where it's a waste for him to perform as such if you aren't going to make it count. So unfortunately, they don't even get close. But in reality, both of their seasons are done for. And the Jaguars get closer and closer to at least getting a favorable pick in the NFL draft. Moving on to the Saints-Bucs game, and hey, all I gotta say for this one is that it did get close. It got contested for a little while. Somehow, some way, the Saints did find themselves having the lead, but the Bucs would take full control in the fourth quarter with the help of a dot to Jalen McMillan on the boundaries and a crafty play by Baker Mayfield to get a sort of shovel pass out of the backfield to Bucky Irving for an 11-yard touchdown run. Ultimately, the game would be sealed up after the Bucs defense would get a stop on 4th down, and they would have a chance to run one more play. Now, let me set the stage. Throughout the course of the game, there were chances, many chances, to get Mike Evans the ball. But it would all come down to this. At this point of time, he was sitting at 8 catches for 80 yards. With that, he would have 995 yards on the season. He needed just 5 more yards on the last drive to get to 1,000 and extend the streak. Now, ultimately, they didn't do it because, again, on 3rd down, everything collapsed. Mike Evans was accounted for. And again, Baker Mayfield had to make an improvisation. He had to do something on the fly to get them in the best possible position to score. And that is exactly what happened. So seeing that play out, I couldn't blame them. But you had another shot at it. You had to go for it. And ultimately, they would get it. With them running trips on the left side of the field. They had clear out routes from their receivers to Mike Evans' furthest left. And he would run an out route. Baker Mayfield would throw him the ball, and it was relatively short of what he needed. So he had to pick up some extra yards on his own volition. And by the end of the play, he would have enough. Every one of his teammates cheering him on, celebrating his accomplishment, rallying around him. The entire crowd, before and especially after the play, were chanting his name in the stands. And ultimately, Mike Evans would become the next most prolific wide receiver to start out their NFL career alongside the likes of Jerry Rice. His 11th straight season, reaching the 1,000-yard mark to open his career, is tied for the most in NFL history with the GOAT of the wide receiver position, depending on who you ask. You can't take that away from him. To be honest, it wouldn't have even been as close. There would have been no doubt about it if he had been fully healthy throughout the entire season. But obviously, he faced a setback due to the injury. There's nothing you can do about that. So, hey, still, credit to him. Bucs get the 27-19 win. But would it keep their playoff hopes alive? Yes. Yes. All they needed to do was win the game against the Saints and have the Falcons potentially drop their game. And ultimately, that's exactly what will happen. See, moving on to this Panthers-Falcons game, you would have the younger quarterbacks in the younger Michael Penix Jr. and Bryce Young facing off. And I was covering this shit the entire time. No one in their right mind was going to watch the game, but it was weird to follow. Both of these offenses had numerous points in the season where they were struggling to put up even 15 points in a game, 16 points in a game. So the fact that both of them, by the end of this ball game, managed to have a game that went to overtime and managed to combine for 82 combined points is very odd and unlike anything I was even expecting to take place on this Sunday slate. All credit to both quarterbacks. They played exceptionally well. Michael Penix would reach the 300-yard milestone in terms of passing for the first time in his career, though 55.3% completion and also an interception, a costly interception in a sense, don't necessarily help him. It's a fine performance by a rookie player, and he did throw 2 touchdown passes to go along with taking it back to his days at Indiana and getting a rushing touchdown in. Drake London would have an exceptional game as well, logging 187 receiving yards on 10 catches with 2 touchdown catches. Bijan Robinson also had a day out of the backfield. In a game where it was all about passing in a sense, both teams also managed to do a decent job of finding their ground in the rushing attack, as Bijan Robinson would have 170 yards on the ground to go on with 2 touchdown runs on 28 carries, and Jaire would also have 52 rushing yards on 9 carries. Meanwhile, for the Panthers, you could say that this was Bryce Young's finest game of his NFL career. And in a season where, during the last few weeks, he had managed to put together solid games that barely resulted in wins outside of their match against the Cardinals, he did more than enough to win them the ballgame in this one. He accounted for 5 total touchdowns in this ball game, 3 passing, 2 rushing, and 251 passing yards on 73.5% completion percentage. Miles Sanders would get the game-sealing rushing touchdown in overtime, and Jalen Coker would add 62 receiving yards on 7 catches, and also a 19-yard pass completion. Just for shits and gigs. Quite the weird matchup that quite literally nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, was expecting. But with that, and the Bucs win, the Falcons were ultimately knocked out of playoff contention. To be real, it would have happened anyways with Kirk Cousins playing the way that he was playing in this season. It would have been like this anyways. But the fact that Michael Penix Jr. still was given the reins over a man that's getting $180 million worth of money in his contract, it's a damn shame. Moving on to the Eagles and the Giants. No, there was no report saying that everything you heard from Nick Sirianni and Saquon Barkley was all a joke and they were going to give him the reins to go and start and get over 2,105 rushing yards. There's nothing like that. They were legitimately serious about it, and Saquon Barkley sat out the game for rest. Simply put, get him ready for next week. Get most of your stars ready for next week. In fact, Eagles didn't really play a lot of quality players. They didn't play any of their quality players. It's as simple as that. Saquon Barkley didn't play. A.J. Brown didn't play. Devontae Smith didn't play. Jalen Hurts is still in the concussion protocol right now, which is very interesting. It probably should give the Eagles fans a little bit of worry. I wouldn't lie at this point. I mean, you're trying to take all the precautions you can, but the fact that he's still going through protocol and may potentially still be feeling effects of a concussion after suffering it more than 2 weeks ago to this point is rather interesting, to say the least. That's besides the point. Eagles really didn't have much to lose in this one, and neither did the Giants for that point. And I guess the Giants are giving them a thank you that they managed to avoid Saquon Barkley doing the absolute worst to them. Of course, there's still a chance to do it if the Eagles can manage to make a Super Bowl, and you had a player in Saquon Barkley with the caliber and potential to do exactly that. And then you just waste his time and value him less than you value Daniel Jones, who again isn't even with your team anymore. But again, all that is just arbitrary at this point. The game itself was about what you'd expect, really. Very slow-paced, not a lot of action from either side. The Eagles were still in full control, though, and they would end up winning the game 20-13. Now, in his first start, Terry McLaurin would step in, throw 2 touchdown passes, no interceptions, and 269 passing yards on 65.9% completion. The rushing game was non-existent, but obviously, again, you don't have your core guys in, so naturally, things are going to be like this. And even the offensive linemen, or a good portion of their offensive linemen, chose to sit out as well. So you would just have to keep that in mind. Jahan Dotson, though, would have a pretty solid game, getting 94 receiving yards on 7 catches. As for the Giants, the finality of their completely terrible season. Their only silver lining is Malik Neighbors with his 64 receiving yards and 5 catches, setting the Giants' single-season record for any wide receiver in their history in terms of single-season catches, with 109 surpassing that of wide receiver Steve Smith. Not that Steve Smith. A very different Steve Smith. So there's your history there. He caps off his rookie season with 1,204 yards and 7 touchdowns as well. Moving on to the Texans and Titans. Very uneventful game. You had started out with C.J. Stroud going perfect on the day and getting his touchdown pass to none other than Nico Collins. After that, he pieced out, and it was really fair game for either squad, to be completely honest. Both of them would have their fair share of it, but ultimately, fair shot at it. But ultimately, with Dameon Pierce coming out of the woodworks to get a 92-yard rushing touchdown, despite Kyrie Fairbairn missing the extra point. It was over right then and there. We'd just be completely honest. Like, yes, Davis Mills would do whatever it is that Davis Mills does. But still, in a matchup between Davis Mills and Will fucking Levis, it felt like at no point of time were the Titans truly able to invoke fear in anybody's heart. I mean, literally, he would have the fumble that would seal up the ball game as Derek Barnett would get him for a scoop 6. Like, the Titans would end up scoring on the last drive of the game, capping off a 94-yard drive within 3 minutes to a very random wide receiver. I'm not even sure who this is. And we get a 2-point conversion to try to make this a game. Shit didn't matter. And honestly, if you were pulling off drives reminiscent of a 9-play, 94-yard, 3-minute drive, most of the season, you probably would have been way better off than a 3-14 football team. There's just no way to go ahead and try to do that now. Like, how dare you even try to move with that sense of urgency at this point? It's ridiculous. That's still, even with that, his numbers look horrible. 9 of 17 passing for Will Levis in this ball game, and 175 yards with a single touchdown. Just 52.9% completion on the day to go along with the aforementioned fumble. It's not even like you're playing a full team at their full strength. Like, they're in the playoffs. They were kind of stumbling in the playoffs. And I mean, this win, it's positive momentum, but let's be honest, the Texans are getting lucky here. I mean, the Titans are that bad. Like, this should be a winnable ball game. That's really all it is. Just got to pick on the little guy here. Tony Pollard would get 62 rushing yards on just 2.8 yards per carry. And Calvin Ridley would have 76 receiving yards on 3 catches. Just a season full of, like, you can't say mediocrity, but just complete ineptitude on the part of Will Levis and untapped potential when you think about it. I mean, even with Calvin Ridley being able to do all this, it still never felt like he was able to string together 2 games at a time, 3 games at a time of consistent play. Obviously, that's on the part of the quarterback getting him the football, right? And they had essentially nobody able to do that effectively enough. And yeah, especially on the defensive side, and as easy as it was, they lost out on getting full action from L'Jarius Sneed before he could ever really take off with the team. So now you're forced to play some of the same cornerbacks that you were not necessarily high on. And that hurts you. Just decline everywhere on that end. Even with Jeffrey Simmons still trying his absolute hardest. Really did not matter. Dameon Pierce would have, with that touchdown, 176 total rushing yards on 19 carries. Moving on to the Bills and Patriots game, Josh Allen would take one snap, simply handing it off to James Cook and peacing out to secure his 105th consecutive start. That was all. But I don't see. It's interesting because I'm supposing that Drake May got hurt because I had seen that Joe Milton III, rookie quarterback from Tennessee, was playing in place of him after the first drive while I'm tracking this. I suppose that's what happened, but from what I saw on post, it looked like Joe Milton III was out there balling. Now, yes, you're not playing the full defense. You're not playing all of their best defenders out there, especially in the front 7. So naturally, you're going to have room to do a little more, way more, without those forces coming directly for your neck. But he was making pass after pass, man. and he got in for a rushing touchdown, decided to do a little backflip. The Bills would score, but this didn't really particularly matter on this day. They weren't impressed about it. However, ultimately, later in the game, James Cook would get his 16th rushing touchdown, which led the league this season. Which is pretty crazy to think about. But all that is overshadowed when you got this man, Joe Milton, completing a 48-yard pass to Kayshon Boutte for a touchdown, in which he literally has to scramble over to the sidelines and deliver a dart over the middle, across his body, and over the head of an oncoming defender. Now, they would rally back after that aforementioned James Cook touchdown, and they would have to settle for a field goal, but not before you would have this man, Joe Milton, eventually make one of the craziest plays that did not end up counting. It seemed as though Mariota Douglas was actually in bounds on this play, so this had a real chance of being a completed pass for a touchdown, as Joe Milton literally spun his way out of pressure while scrambling out of the pocket and ran up and around the boundaries to deliver a dime of a pass to the Mariota Douglas in the end zone for a potential touchdown. Even then, it would not have had a chance because this man would literally force them into a foul. Unfortunately, own people selling that man of a great play. So, by the end of it, you even had the Bills just going ahead on a 4-play drive that didn't see them gain a single yard. They literally just attempted pass after pass after pass and threw them incomplete to end off the ball game. So the Patriots would win this one 23-16. With Joe Milton going 22 of 29 from the field with a touchdown and 241 passing yards. Not much went down in the rushing game, but Kayshon Boutte did have a career performance with 7 receptions for 117 yards. As for the Bills, Mitch Trubisky would have just 101 yards passing on 15 of 21 completion and a touchdown. Mike White would step in and throw 3 of 11 for just 27.3% completion percentage. But again, none of that necessarily mattered here. This is truly a throwaway game. Ray Davis would have 15 rushes for 64 yards. And Curtis Samuel, Ohio State man, would have 7 receptions for 52 yards in this game. Surely this won't affect anything in the Patriots organization, right? Moving on to the Chargers and Raiders. And a lot of interesting things took place in this one. More notable takeaways, though, don't even necessarily have to do with the on-field production. Though, again, in some cases it can be accounted for. For example, the Chargers, with winning this ball game, they could actually secure a higher seed than the Steelers here, if they were to make it happen, given the fact that the Steelers dropped their game to the Bengals on Saturday. So naturally, you're going to come out, you're going to try to sell some fight with this team. And that would eventually fare well for them. They did get off to a slower start, but by the time the fourth quarter came, it was all Chargers, mostly, from there on. Now, Aiden O'Connell would do relatively well for the Raiders. Just 1 interception, but 70.6% completion with 214 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. They still do not have a run game, which is hurting whenever you're trying to be so focused on passing game with someone who isn't as established. But that's besides the point. Jacoby Myers would have 9 receptions for 123 yards. in this game and a touchdown. And the most notable player here was the second most prolific wide receiver, with Brock Bowers having 50 receiving yards, 4 receptions, and a touchdown. He would break the long-standing NFL rookie tight end record for receptions in a rookie season by a tight end since Mike Ditka. He would finish this season with 112 receptions, setting the all-time record, to go along with 1,194 yards and his 5th touchdown on the year. Credit to Brock Bowers. He was rightfully selected to the Pro Bowl, and he will probably be an All-Pro. We just got to continue to stamp that point home. Justin Herbert would have a great day, though. 346 passing yards for him and 2 touchdown passes to go on 77.8% completion from the field. He'll get J.K. Dobbins back, and he would lead the team in rushing yards, so he wasn't necessarily effective in terms of yards per carry, but that's fine. Making his return, you're trying to get him back up to game speed, so, that's okay. He still led the way for them. Quentin Johnston, though, would have a career day. The man known for dropping passes left and right, up and down the field, in the middle of his body or in the lower end, anywhere you can think of, he's going to put that ball on the ground. This man caught all but one of his targets. 13 receptions for 186 yards in this ball game. That is completely out of left field. I'll tell you what, if he can begin to do that, and I'm not necessarily saying that, like, for any receiver to put up 10 plus catches and 180 plus yards is a lot of difficult work. But if you're performing that well to where you're effective to go along with all of these targets in terms of volume, you could establish yourself as a true number 1 caliber wide receiver. Now, Matt McConkey still had a day as well. 95 receiving yards for him on 5 catches. But that's a good win by the Chargers, and with that, they would actually assume the 5th seed. Now, they did lose to the Steelers earlier in the season, so if they had lost this game, the Steelers would have assumed the 5 seed, despite their loss. However, with things panning out the way they did, the Chargers get a decent draw in the wild card, as they will be the very first team to play in the playoffs against none other than the Texans on Saturday. And the Steelers, ironically enough, on this grand slide against playoff caliber teams, have no other choice now but to face the Ravens in the wild card on Saturday night on Prime Video. That shit is going to be some trash. I'm telling you right now. Yes, it's a well-established rivalry. Yes, the Steelers got the better of them in the first game this season. But with the way they have been playing down the stretch against great teams, including that Ravens game, where they lost by 17 points, if you're playing like that, they're going to obliterate them. I just have to note that. They're going to mop the floor with them. Absolutely. You can thank the Chargers for that, though. At least, unlike them, they handled their business when they needed to. Moving on to the Chiefs and Broncos match. Everybody was rested for the Chiefs. So, I don't know what to make of this. With this win, the Broncos did get in the playoffs, knocking out the Bengals. Because the Bengals would need both the Dolphins and the Broncos to lose. They were not going to get that job here, and the Chiefs were not going to allow them to even have a shot at letting it happen, for obvious reasons. But that's neither here nor there, right? I guess it's a fine game by Bo Nix. You got to keep in mind that it's against second teamers, but for him to have more touchdowns than incompletions while completing almost 90% of his passes is respectable. Yes, most of them were short passes. Most of them, if not all of them. But it's still, you can't necessarily take it away from him, right? The numbers are there. You know, you can't try to dispel them. He did the work he needed to do to reach that point. You can't take that away from him. All you gotta know is that when it comes time for the Broncos to, with winning this game and being the 7th seed in the AFC, to face the 2 seed Bills next week in the wild card. Don't expect anywhere near this result for Broncos. In fact, I'd argue that if their defense doesn't necessarily show, because that is one thing that could certainly keep them in that game. If their defense doesn't show, Bills are going to do this exact same thing to them. As for the Chiefs, again, they could care less. They already secured a bye. They're going to rest all their starters and have them ready for the playoffs. It has been, I guess, that's a weird thing about it, because when you really think about it, in terms of the regular season, the past couple seasons for the Chiefs, it has been grueling, not only mentally, physically in some cases. Just, man, like, they are going through it. When you're playing that much contested football over a season, that could get to you. And you want to make sure that when you get in this divisional round matchup between whoever you have to face, you're somewhat energized and healthy, ready to go and play some ball. They're making the right decision here. They could care less about the result of this game. Moving on to the Dolphins and Jets. The Jets had a chance to spoil their party for the Dolphins. Because again, the Dolphins would need, in this instance, the Bengals and the Broncos to lose to get in, and they would need to win this ball game. So it made for a pretty interesting case. You have Aaron Rodgers trying to go in and trying to close out the season the right way in what has been a drastic 2-year tenure with this squad. You're trying to give them some sign of life here. It would take a little while for that to happen. All right? Like, quite literally. The Dolphins punt, and then a pass from Aaron Rodgers gets tipped up. And it's caught by the former Seahawk and Tyrell Dodson to open up the ball game for them. Now, the Dolphins naturally decide, with their paltry offense in sub-32-degree weather, to stall out in Jets territory and kick the field goal. The Jets would then punt, and the teams would continue on this path of trading punt after punt after punt after punt. In fact, on one of these possessions, some really, really stupid shit happened. All right? This first possession that ended in a punt for them, they had the nerve to try to pull out a flea flicker with a reverse pass to Devontae Adams, throwing it back to Aaron Rodgers. Everything was clamped up to the point where Aaron Rodgers had absolutely no choice but to throw it all the way back over to Davante Adams with the lowest amount of velocity imaginable. Slow ass velocity on that pass. It was almost floating in the air to the point where the second that Davante Adams gets it, he gets lit the fuck up by Jalen Ramsey. Put on his ass. And they promptly lost the yard on that play. That was the kind of shit that was going on. The Jets were trying to be the Jets again. They weren't trying to go ahead and end the season off on a high note. They're going to continue to put their fans through the fucking torture, even in situations that look favorable to them. It's fucking crazy. But the Dolphins would still, even with all of that going on, manage to stall out. Even after Davon Achane, one of the fastest players in the league, got the longest play of the game on a 61-yard run. However, on that same play, he was caught. Hawked down by the former Seahawk and DJ Reed Jr. You gotta respect that. And ultimately, they would stand firm on the goal line, forcing Davon Achane to lose yardage on the very next play. And then forcing them all the way back to the 10-yard line where Jason Sanders would kick a 28-yard field goal. More punts would be exchanged between the two teams before the Jets finally decided to lock in. They had to. You get involvement by all of Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, and Allen Lazard on this drive, where it would end with Aaron Rodgers getting a touchdown pass to Tyler Conklin from 5 yards out. This touchdown would allow Aaron Rodgers to accomplish a ton of different milestones here. He, after waiting for so long to make it happen, would finally throw his 500th touchdown pass, putting him up there with the likes of Breeze, Brady, Manning, and Favre as the only other players with 500 or more touchdown passes in their NFL career. And this is despite Aaron Rodgers being one of the least turnover-prone quarterbacks in that entire group. As to that point, he had only thrown 116 interceptions in his NFL career. And as long as he's been playing too, averaging only 5 or 6 interceptions a season, that's fucking legendary stuff. He'd also become the third player to have at least 25 or more touchdown passes in their age 41 or older season, along with Warren Moon and Tom Brady. Great accomplishments here, and it would seem to keep on rolling for the Jets, as on the next possession, you would now see what it's like to be a quarterback that doesn't have 500 touchdown passes. As Tyler Huntley would actually manage to get a solid game to Jalen Waddle before throwing a stupid-ass pass to Ashton Davis for the first time. The Jets would then turn the ball over on downs after that. They tried to drive for a little bit, but they would not protect Aaron Rodgers on this subsequent 4th and 5 conversion. At least they didn't try to run the ball and pick up a first down like they would have typically done in weeks earlier this season. The Dolphins would decide, though, to give them another chance. He fumbled the ball, Tyler Huntley, back-to-back plays. He fumbled. Think about how unorthodox, how unreal that truly sounds. And on the second one, they would make him pay for it. Hassan Reddick would do a great job of punching the ball out, and Quincy Williams would get his mitts on the football to then get the Jets in prime field goal position. All it took was 3 plays 3 13-yard plays. Perfect fucking drive. Where Aaron Rodgers would then get his 501st touchdown pass to Allen Lazard. Then the Dolphins would get the ball back and would try to feed it to the likes of Devon Achane and Malik Washington, but Tyler Huntley still had other thoughts in his mind and decided to chuck up a deep ball, a fuck it bomb, yet again getting picked off by none other than Ashton Davis for his first 2 interceptions of the season in just 1 quarter. And thus the Jets would go into half with a 15-6 lead. Now they would start off with a punt. Dolphins were still having misfortune on offense, as Tyler Huntley would then fumble on yet another play. And the Dolphins overall would have another possession ending with fumbles on back-to-back plays. It wasn't Tyler Huntley this time. Jonnu Smith would get the ball from Tyler Huntley, and Quincy Williams would actually force a pretty good fumble on him, with Solomon Thomas recovering that one. The Jets would then kick a field goal. Ultimately, at that point, it felt like it could be the Jets' game to lose, really. Even with the Dolphins managing to drive down the field and get a score for a touchdown with Devon Achane crashing through. It did not seem to matter. The very next drive would see the Jets continue to get the Packers boys involved. You would have Allen Lazard get a 43-yard touchdown, 43-yard catch from him, generally speaking. And then Garrett Wilson would help them get a little closer. But you would have Devontae Adams get another touchdown catch here, giving them a 12-point lead. The Dolphins would then try to respond. You could chalk this up to being garbage time, truthfully, though. Malik Washington and Jalen Waddle would get a pair of 15-plus yard catches before Jonnu Smith eventually cash in for a touchdown from 4 yards out. The Jets entered the game with a 2-5 record when leading after 3 quarters in the season, which was tied for the worst mark in NFL history along with the Browns. But that was not going to happen here. The Jets were determined to end the ball game and end this season of, to call it despair is an understatement, really. Complete agony. Whatever sort of words you want to use, anything could really apply here. Because that's just how truly random and truly negative everything seemed to be. They needed to end this game off in a positive way. And they would do that, as Devontae Adams would get a 29-yard gain, and then Garrett Wilson would get a short catch and juke the shit out of Jalen Ramsey, where Breece Hall would then become the closer he certainly has been over this period of time and get the game-sealing touchdown catch to give the Jets the 32-20 win, ending any chance the Dolphins had of making the playoffs, if not, that wasn't already the case, from the fact that the Broncos have won their game. Even then, it wouldn't have mattered, because the Bengals, if the Dolphins and Broncos had lost, would have gotten in anyways. Well, it wouldn't have mattered. But with an offense like this that continues to just disappear, really, it is quite literally a disappearing act. You're on cloud 9 when your speed guys are flying all over the place in warmer temperatures. But when you get into playoff caliber football or freezing temperatures, you don't know how to operate offensively all of a sudden. And any type of concept that you're trying to draw up here, whether it be the short screen passes out of the field to the running backs or the little hitch routes here and there to different wide receivers on the outside, certainly fail at every single turn here. That was no different in this ball game. I mean, Tyler Huntley had 227 passing yards, touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Devon Achane had 121 rushing yards and a touchdown, all for naught. Jonnu Smith had 56 receiving yards and 9 catches with a touchdown, all for naught. Meanwhile, Aaron Rodgers, outside of the one interception, he played a solid game all around. 274 passing yards, 4 touchdowns to end off this season on the highest note he possibly could have, albeit against the reeling Dolphins team. Devontae Adams would have 88 receiving yards on 6 catches with a touchdown. Allen Lazard would have 71 receiving yards on 3 catches with a touchdown, and Garrett Wilson would have 51 receiving yards on 4 catches. Everybody, too, during the game, leading up to the game, also, they were talking in the tone that suggested that this would be Aaron Rodgers' last game as a Jet, or even potentially his last game as a player in the league, as they were believing that he was going to retire after the game or such. And it's like, I mean, I don't know. Even he does recognize that, yes, his future is uncertain right now. But, like, damn, it's almost like y'all trying to make the decision for it. That's kind of how I felt about it. Like, yes, there's potential for it for sure, but, like, at every turn, oh, this is Aaron Rodgers' last stand. We don't know that for sure. Nobody knows that for sure. The man literally doesn't talk to most people outside of those on Pat McAfee's show during an NFL season. So nobody has a true idea right now. To just assume that consistently is a bit rash, if I do say so myself. But that's besides the point. Moving on to the 49ers and Cardinals, and to be completely honest, both of these teams desperately needed to have their seasons end. Desperately. I mean, the Cardinals completely underwhelmed, but at the very least, you wanted to close it out on a positive note, and you did. I mean, Kyler Murray had 242 passing yards in this game to go on with 4 touchdowns, while their running backs accounted for 2 total rushing touchdowns as well. Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. catch touchdowns in this game and account for 126 receptions combined on 12 catches. To go along with Greg Dortch's 2 receiving touchdowns on 47 yards and 4 catches. It had been a rough sailing for them all season long. And yet they still managed to, in spite of all of that, beat the 49ers twice. However, the first matchup between these two teams, they were obviously in better health, despite obviously the 49ers having a loss of a wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk, and obviously at that point, the status of Christian McCaffrey was not necessarily outlined like it should have been from the jump, which is certainly on the fault of Kyle Shanahan. Still, even with the backlash from that, even with that backfiring, he could not have anticipated how everything else was set to go over the course of the rest of this season. Like, quite, I kid you not. The 49ers have just been through way too much. I do not see a way that a season like this, given what had happened, could have been any different for the 49ers. It's difficult to overcome all of those things. And not to mention that other teams in the NFC around this time were starting to get stronger and stronger than their current roster. Like, I kid you not. You start out not even before the season. You have your rookie wide receiver getting shot. Then you lose one of your core wide receiver pieces to injury with a torn ACL. You have Christian McCaffrey dealing with a torn Achilles. You have multiple people dealing with personal issues. You have Jordan Mason going out with an ACL injury, I believe. And in this game, it just continued to get worse and worse and worse. Deebo Samuel Sr. didn't even see playing time in this ballgame. I don't know whether that was injury or not. It could very well have been. Like Chris Conley was getting playing time in this game. They had to give the rookie Jacob Cowling a chance as well. And Isaac Grando, after just a couple carries in the ballgame, would also go down with a season-ending injury. Meaning that the good portion of their entire running back room to this point is now out. Their only remaining true running back on the roster to this point is Patrick Taylor Jr. And he would have a fine game, though it didn't really matter. But you're quite literally on your last leg as a team. So naturally, though they tried their absolute hardest to keep it close, they just couldn't anymore. They lose by 23 points with a final score of 47-24 in this one. Because there was too much. Like, it is just quite difficult, like I said, to overcome all those things. There's no other way I can put this. They've got to take a lot of time this offseason to recoup. They will certainly need it. Because I'm talking about other teams like the Chiefs being that great and having the luxury of being able to overcome those things. Not every team is built the same. Not every team is going to be able to deal with all of that and still put out a winning roster week in, week out. And the 49ers were the latest victim to that inevitable and universal truth, really. But moving on to the final game of the season, with quite possibly the highest stakes on the line, we have the Vikings and the Lions to cap things off here. Now, this game was going to be historical. This was the first battle for the number one seed between any team in the final week of a regular season since 1993. This game saw the highest combined winning percentage between two teams ever. And it was the first game between two teams with at least 13 wins or more since 1977, and became the very first game in NFL history with two teams facing off that had more than 14 wins or more. Whoever lost this game was going to drop down to the 5 seed, and whoever won this game was going to secure the first round bye. So everybody, and I mean everybody, was truly waiting for Sunday Night Football to take place so we could see how things would pan out. And off the rip, it was highly contested. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs' speed would come into play as he would pick up a nice conversion on third down, bouncing it all the way outside and beating Dallas Turner on the edge. Foreshadowing. Right? They would still, even with all that, trying to feed him more. This time, the Vikings defense was ready. Maybe they should have stuck to that game plan. They punted the ball, and the Vikings would do the very same on their possession. Even though Aaron Jones got a few solid runs of his own, Sam Darnold would miss some pretty easy reads. And this would be a theme of his night as well. But they were still in it for the time being. On the next drive, the Lions would get it, and Amon-Ra St. Brown would go pick up 23 yards on second down before they would get eventually into yet another fourth down situation. You know what they're going to do every single time they get in fourth down situations. They're going to go for it. And you know what the Vikings are going to do in those situations, especially with Brian Flores as their DC. They're going to blitz. They are going to dial up that pressure. But Jared Goff in that moment was ready for it, and Jahmyr Gibbs would make an exceptional catch over the middle, before Jahmyr Gibbs would then take it upon himself on first down to blaze past everybody on defense and get the first touchdown of the ball game. He wasn't finished. The Vikings would then punt the ball, going 3 and out. The Lions would do the very same, and then the Vikings would actually drive down the field. And this is where things started to get, I won't say that things got out of hand yet, but the signs of this becoming a truly bad game for the Vikings started to flare up here. They would have some solid gains, along with Justin Jefferson getting a catch on Amir Robertson for 31 yards to get down to Detroit's red zone. And then they got completely, and I mean completely, clamped up. 4 plays, just 2 yards, 3 straight incompletions, including one where he completely missed Justin Jefferson in the back of the end zone. But they got a little fortunate after a potential safety by Jared Goff. If they had called intentional grounding, they stated that there was no foul, as there was a receiver in the area of the pass. So he was set. He wouldn't get away with it a second time, because it got tipped up, and Ivan Pace Jr. would get the better of Jared Goff, intercepting him and getting the Vikings in yet another goal-to-go situation, where yet again there would be 3 straight incompletions. This time, all of them were to Justin Jefferson. Now, in the back of the end zone this time, he had a chance to catch one and straight up dropped it. That's on him completely. But on this 3rd and goal, he was open. And Sam Darnold, feeling the heat rather early in the ball game, missed him again on something that would be routine for him this season. I mean, this is a man that had the NFL record for most passing touchdowns by a quarterback in their first season with a franchise. With a new team, rather. The same person. And yet it felt as though he was trying to revert back to his ways as a Jet. Still, even with all this, they would get on the board, and they would force a turnover on downs with them trying to go for it on 4th down again. This time they stopped them. Jared Goff felt enough pressure to force him into an errant pass. The Vikings would then drive down the field again and failed to get a touchdown on the board, having to settle for yet another field goal. They would give the Lions too much time to work with, though. Way too much time to work with. And would manage to get down the field to Minnesota's 30-yard line, where Jake Bates would kick a 48-yard field goal to give them a 4-point lead in the halftime. Again, not necessarily a high-scoring game like we imagined, but definitely contested, definitely having solid contributions by both defenses, and certainly still up in the air. Like I said, it took a little while, but that would change. That would change. Oh boy. The Vikings would get the ball back to open up the second half. And they would once again do nothing, despite getting in the red zone after a 58-yard run from Cameron Akers. Run stuffed on first down, then a catch that was just short on second down, and then 2 back-to-back incompletions. On their last 3 possessions, those are 12 straight plays in the red zone, deep in Detroit's red zone, without a single score, a single productive play that led to scoring on those drives. It's absurd, and it quite literally swung the course of the momentum as everything unfolded. Now, again, they would get a little lucky because by going for it there, they pinned Detroit back deep enough to where they needed to try and get space in some way. Rushing the football was not going to be enough, so they did a pretty rational thing and tried to get a deep route to go. But on it, you have Jared Goff chuck it up completely. And you would have him throw an interception to Harrison Smith, giving the Vikings yet another chance in great field position to do something more than just settle for a field goal. And yet, that is exactly what they would do, despite a 17-yard catch from Justin Jefferson, getting them closer to a manageable third down. It did not pan out. So now the Lions were just tired of hibernating, I guess, and they decided to wake themselves up because the Vikings allowed them to linger around for that much time and failed to do anything themselves. So that is exactly what would take place. They would matriculate their way down the field with a few short passes after another, though there were a couple of longer catches by the likes of Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown for 17 and 12 yards respectively. Then you would have Jamison Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs getting more involved, and Jahmyr Gibbs would ultimately get a 2-yard gain on 3rd and short to get them into the dreaded 4th down and short. Again, coming into this game, the Lions have the most attempts on 4th down and a top 5 rate of conversion. So naturally, they decide to not do a predictable play call, placing Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield on a route, and Von Gonkel, the same man that lit his ass up earlier and knocked the wind out of him, taking him out for a couple of plays in the first quarter, couldn't make up his mind whether to rush the passer or account for Gibbs out of the backfield. He ultimately chose to rush the passer, and he flopped. Like, everybody just wants to underestimate Jahmyr Gibbs' ability for some reason. It cost him there. Put him up 17-9. Now, the Vikings would have another shot at it, but the second that Will Reichert missed his 51-yarder, it was a wrap. The Lions got a quicker score, getting Jahmyr Gibbs in for another touchdown, his 3rd of the ball game. With a score that quick, naturally, even if a general fan is thinking it's over, you still have a realistic amount of time to work with. But you needed to drive down the field, and you needed it fast, or it was going to be a wrap. And ultimately, after a few plays and more pressure came on from the likes of the Lions with the help of Mr. Muhammad, you would have them punt for some reason, which I did get. I did understand it. you were seeing them drive down the field that consistently, why give them a shorter field to work with? You got to make them work for it. So, as fine as it was, if you were on the defensive side for the Vikings, you desperately needed to stop them, force a turnover, do something to get your offense the ball back. And granted, they were doing it earlier. They were doing their job earlier. But by this point, they were worn out, and certainly enough, you would have Jahmyr Gibbs do the thing yet again. Starting out the drive with a 47-yard run and ending it off with his 4th touchdown of the ball game. Ridiculous work. To go along with the tons of scrimmage yards that he had in this game. His 4 touchdowns were tied for the most by a Lions player, skill position player, in their franchise history, along with the great Barry Sanders. That kind of game for Jahmyr Gibbs. The Lions and Vikings would go back-to-back possessions with turning the ball over on downs before the end of the game, though the Lions, a team that is dealing with so many injuries, and even in this game, managed to just get Alex Anzalone back after his injury. They saw Levi Onwuzurike go down. They saw Kevin Zeitler go down. And they may also be in great danger of having Terrion Arnold be out for a little while. Now, it does help that with this 31-9 victory they have gotten, if it is not a severe injury, there's a good chance that Terrion Arnold can take this time to rest up and heal prior to their divisional round matchup. But it's still just them literally fighting a war of attrition, despite them having a 15-2 record. Their best record in franchise history, by the way. You thank Dan Campbell for that. Like, yes, it was looking dire in his early tenure with the squad, but he has done a magnificent job with this team. You can't understate that. You can't take that away from him. Yes, also, they probably should have made the Super Bowl last year if not for them completely collapsing. If you want to hold that against them, fine. But the fact that even just a few years back, if you're going to tell somebody that you would see the Lions having back-to-back seasons with a top 5 or so seed in their conference, be in playoff contention, and be in Super Bowl contention, you would get laughed at and ran right out of whatever room you were in at that point. Nobody would fucking believe you. And yet, here they are. So credit to them. Lions get the 1 seed. Vikings fall down to the 5 seed and face off against the Rams on Monday Night Football. Yes. Jared Goff, despite having 2 interceptions and just 1 touchdown pass, did a great job of carving up the defense and responding to the pressure for the most part. Especially way better than Sam Darnold did. I mean, he completed 81.8% of his passes. Still, despite those terrible, terrible mistakes. It did not matter. He had Jahmyr Gibbs accounting for 4 total touchdowns by himself to go along with 170 total yards on 28 touches. Amon-Ra St. Brown would have 77 yards receiving on 6 catches, and Laporta would have 63 receiving yards on 7 catches. As for Sam Darnold, again, quite the reversal here. Less than 44% of his passes and just 166 passing yards. By far his worst game of the season. And by far the worst game he's had in quite a long time. That is definitely going to have to clean up before they face off against the Rams. It also says something when, for a while there, Justin Jefferson had only gotten 2 catches for like around 39 yards or so, I believe, as Robertson was managing to clamp him up somehow. Now, some of these misses, again, on these throws, affected the catch-to-target rate. But that still also should not be happening. I mean, receivers in this ballgame, true receivers in this ballgame, between the likes of Jefferson, Naylor, and Addison, combined for just 7 catches and 107 yards. With Justin Jefferson and Addison combining for just 4 catches and 54 yards. Those are your core guys, and you're feeling that much pressure that you cannot, under any circumstance, get them the ball in the right spot. So maybe that's something that the Rams can look at on film and try to exploit, but that remains to be seen. And with that, the regular season is in the books. And with that comes some potential coach hirings and firings, as Black Monday would come about yesterday. So I was waiting to make this video. I probably would have done it yesterday, but wanted to see just how many moves would be made or not as it pertained to personnel movement. But again, along with that are some other developments mixed in. So we'll just get straight into it, starting out with some injury updates, as Jaire Alexander would be slated to be out for the season due to injury for the Packers. Definitely going to be a huge loss for them going up against the Eagles at full strength. Just keep in mind that the Packers open their season in sunny Brazil, with the nightline all surreal and everything. And they lost it to the Eagles there. The last thing they want to do is lose to the Eagles in Philadelphia to close out their season as well. Though again, with some of these injuries, again, it could very much hinder their ability to do just that. Jordan Whitehead, Bucs safety, would be placed on the non-football injury list after he suffered a car accident over the course of the days leading up to their game against the Saints. So, I don't know how his recovery is going. I don't necessarily know his chances of being back for the game, but you can only hope that he continues to recover well from it and just rest up, recuperate in the best way that he can. On Sunday, following that 25-point loss to those gosh darn Baltimore Ravens, the Browns would take it upon themselves to fire Ken Dorsey as well as Andy Dickerson. Ken Dorsey was their offensive coordinator for this season. And yes, they have been through quite the whirlwind of situations here. I mean, there's no doubt about it, man. Yes, Deshaun Watson was not playing the best, but that injury made things even worse. And for one reason or another, Ken Dorsey could just never manage to get it under control. They were the 28th ranked team in terms of total offense. Their rushing attack was not necessarily prevalent. They were the 29th best team in that regard. Their passing was not a threat either, and just overall underwhelming. They're 206.2 passing yards per game, ranked in the bottom half, and they were also the worst scoring offense in the NFL with just 15.2 points per game. Naturally, somebody had to go, and so I think it's a fine decision. I don't have a problem with it. They should also be noted that they did decide to keep Kevin Stefanski, which is the right call. This is a very... you're not going to find many ways to really win in the situation, no matter the coach. It's not his fault. He's done a fine job with this football team. So he deserves to stay there. there shouldn't be any flack coming his way. He's done as best as he could. And it's just like, nah, man. Nah, bro. Paltry offense like that on the road to being a 3-14 ball club, yeah, you gotta go. I see that completely. Similar thing would go on with the Patriots, as with their win, they would actually lose out on a first overall pick, as they would become 4-13, giving the Titans the highest odds to now possess that draft pick. And I guess that in this realization, they just decided to let go of Jerod Mayo. Now, Robert Kraft would have his own opinion in a press conference or so about his decision, and even he recognized that it was not necessarily the best situation to put Jerod Mayo in, and that he felt bad for him. This is his quote from that press conference. I don't know. It's like, could he have gotten a little more time? I mean, I guess. But with an organization like the Patriots, man, I guess you're just sick and tired of being in this stretch. This decade, this entire decade, you've just been in a stretch of losing, really. Very unorthodox to not just the ownership there, but also the fan base. They can't get with that shit. To think that the Patriots would ever be contending for a number 1 overall pick just a mere 6 years ago would have been incredulous. They're here and they have to affront that. I guess they can get away with it as well. They don't necessarily have anything established. So it's not like you're removing an individual that has ingrained enough structure in this organization just yet to have such an effect on the overall team, per se. But, yeah, with that leaves an open head coaching position, and many people have cited that Mike Vrabel could be a person they look into. Now, he was interviewing, or is slated to actually interview, with the Jets, but I think that the Patriots could also very much look into him. We'll see about that. Tyreek Hill wants out of Miami. He wants out of Miami desperately. He made that very clear during an interview with, I guess, local media and other different networks after their loss to the Jets on Sunday. Literally just said, I'm opening the door. I'm out, bro. Straight like that. Then he would take it upon himself to change his picture with a photoshopped face of his on that of the body of Antonio Brown as he was peacing out against the New York Jets in early 2022. Like, okay. You think that anybody is just going to go ahead and fawn over the potential of you coming to their football team when you're trying to allude to that particular incident? Very interesting stuff. On Monday as well, the Jaguars would finally take it upon themselves to fire Doug Pederson after such a shitty football season. They have not necessarily been elite during his time. And this 4-13 season seemed to be the icing on the cake for them in a year in which their offense just sucked. They crumbled this season. And their defense, which was supposed to be a more redeemable part of their team, also regressed mightily. But even with those offensive struggles in mind, for whatever reason, I still haven't heard any news on Press Taylor being let go. Though that could be happening, maybe. I would hope it does. They should have already made the decision, though. And it's really scary because if you're going to wait that long, then chances are they're probably going to keep that nigga, which makes no sense. And apparently Press Taylor and Doug Pederson have a connection anyways. So you're going to let Pederson go, but then keep the offensive coordinator that seems to gel better with him? I don't know how they think that's going to work, but okay. They're also going to retain Trent Baalke for some reason, which is a pretty weird decision as well. And Jaguars fans have certainly got their own opinions about that. Good luck, man. That's all I can say. In terms of retaining talent, the Giants have also decided to keep both Joe Schoen and Brian Dable. Maybe they do deserve another chance, but I don't know. I feel like all of the covers that they got on Hard Knocks talking about the Saquon Barkley incident and then leading this team to what it became this season without even trying to overcome that at all made them look like complete idiots and like they do not necessarily know what the hell they're doing in their respective positions. But maybe they're afforded another shot. They better not fuck it up, because this is probably the last straw for them. Both. The Bengals would take it upon themselves after just barely missing out on the playoffs to fire DC Lou Anarumo, as well as their offensive line, linebacker, and defensive back coaches. All of them. For as great as their offense was, and I quite literally stated it as I was breaking down the game, they became the first team as well to have league leaders in passing yards, sacks, and receiving yards. Dan Orlovsky put it best when he said it yesterday. With them missing out on the playoffs, they also become the first team to accomplish all of that and not contend because of how porous their defense truly was. And the fact also that they do always seem to get off on slow starts. Get off to slow starts to open up their seasons. That never helps you if you're having to consistently battle back and try to claw your way in to a postseason bid. That's not necessarily a recipe for success. And it's so risky that it rarely works for any NFL team. The Bengals, while it would have been cool to have seen Joe Burrow in the Bengals and take on all of these great teams that we understand as NFL fans that he has taken down before in time. He has quite literally proven that he can. That is not, there's no doubt about that. He would at least have a fighting chance to take these teams and Ravens, the Bills, the Chiefs, etc. There's a fighting chance if you have Joe Burrow there. I get that. But with a defense that finished at least the defense that finished 25th in total yards per game and would also go on to be in the bottom half in terms of defensive passing yards allowed, as well as middle of the pack in terms of rushing yards allowed per game. You're having to consistently outscore teams on a week-to-week basis when you are giving up 25.5 points per game, which is tied with the Raiders for the 25th best, 25th overall defense in that category. It's insane. And offensive line coaches, well, I get it. I get it because, like, goodness gracious. Like, quite literally, Joe Burrow would still end up going down in that game and would be injured for a little bit because their offensive line is that garbage. And it's not necessary. Like, some of the personnel is bad. I think Cordell Volson has to go. And Marius Mims is a rookie. He's cut some slack. And Orlando Brown Jr. may very well be getting overpaid, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, there is some redeemable talent on that line. And yet they are consistently succumbing to pressure, forcing Joe Burrow in dire situations. And despite that, he still balled the fuck out. Still balled out. But it has to come down to technique on that end. And clearly, whoever is handling that job was not doing good enough. So he had to go. Fair play there. Good riddance. It would be detailed that Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson would actually face a setback in the recovery process from his Achilles tear that took him out for the rest of this regular season. And they stated as well, the NFL insiders that covered this, that his status for the next season is uncertain at this point. Even after restructuring his contract, you could still be in a situation where you are dealing with paying the man, overpaying the man, when he's not even able to give you great contribution on the football field. Now, hopefully, this setback is nothing too crazy. But that would absolutely stink for the Browns in so many ways. And if that does happen, we gotta look more into the Haslams as being just inept on the business side. Completely inept. As if we weren't already doing that with them when you gave the man a $230 million fully guaranteed contract in the first place. Then you feel so desperate that you're trying to rework it. You're still going to have to take on a pretty sizable cap hit. But it eases it just a little bit. Just a little bit. To try and make some free agency moves. When again, as I've stated in videos past, you ain't getting nobody to go to fucking Cleveland. You're not getting anybody to go there with you playing like this. You're going to have to build through the draft somehow. So it's really up to Andrew Berry at this point to make sure that he brings in a good draft class. Because this team is going to be stuck in the same cycle if they cannot get it figured out there. It's straight like that. The Seattle Seahawks, despite having a successful, somewhat, first season under Mike McDonald, would take it upon themselves to fire offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb out of Washington. Yes, it's a bit unorthodox to have him get fired this early on in his tenure. And yes, this is coming in a season where the Seahawks finished as a top 10 ball club in terms of passing offense, with Geno Smith doing all of what he was doing, despite the overall inefficiency in terms of turnovers. Because that certainly played a factor in why some games were lost. I'm not going to sit here and act like that wasn't the case. But there are multiple reasons as to why Ryan Grubb was fired, and I do get it. I do get it. Multiple slow starts. Backed all aspects of the team into a corner in multiple games this season. And to the point where they could not overcome them. At all. I think back to the Lions game, losing that 42-29, despite having Geno Smith do all of what he did, it still was not enough because they could not get anything going early on in the game to even remotely match with that Lions offense. And it was like that time and time again, even against defenses that were atrocious, completely atrocious, especially compared to the Lions at that specific point in the season in late September. Another reason why, when you look at rushing offense, and I mean, yes, I'm kind of bitching and complaining about Kenneth Walker III having a down season, but it's really true. He did have a down season. And that was the benefit, that was the result of quite an unorthodox scheme in that aspect called by Ryan Grubb. Yes, there were a few good games by Zach Charbonnet mixed in as well, but overall, the Seahawks finished 28th in rushing offense. 28th in rushing offense. To just think about that for a second, even when the Seahawks were having the worst of their few seasons over the past few years, or like down seasons for their standards over the past few years, they were still consistently at least an upper half football team in terms of the rushing offense. That was an identity of the Seahawks back then. And yes, you gotta find a way to balance it out with the passing game, but it seemed like it could never be found in that sense. Never has this happened. The Seahawks did not have a single rusher even get over 600 yards. Also something that has been quite a long time coming for this ball club. That had to go. That had to go. And then third, even with the passing offense being in the top 10, it seemed as though it was never truly dynamic. Why do I say that? I mean, as great as Jackson Smith and Jigba's season was, a good amount of these catches were not even allowing him to utilize the best of his strengths, which would be getting out in space and actually being able to make people miss, which he can more than do. He has been exceptional at it for such a long time, but it wasn't really on full display because of the sheer depth of some of these passes and some of the routes that were being called. I can excuse the ones in which he adjusted on the fly and had to work himself open, but that's just it. Why aren't these plays called up with better overall routes in certain situations to get people open almost immediately instead of having to consistently alter the route on the fly, confusing the quarterback, confusing the wide receiver, and getting the entire offense in a flux, which led to multiple 3-and-outs, which led to multiple untimely wasted possessions throughout the course of the season. Tyler Lockett also had a down year for his standards. And DK Metcalf also had a down year for his standards. Now, naturally, when you have Jackson Smith and Jigba doing this, there is going to be a hindrance elsewhere. I do get that. But there seemed to have been an imbalance in terms of the distribution there. And you have exceptional weapons all around. I mean, there's just no way that any of that should be happening. If we're being truthfully honest here, there's a good chance that, at the very least, all of these receivers are more than capable of logging seasons of more than 800 yards or more, with at least 2 of them in, I guess, if you're going to get to DK Metcalf a little more. I mean, literally, DK Metcalf finished just 8 yards short of 1,000 yards. And Tyler Lockett could have gotten way more than 600. He's capable of more than that. So those are the reasons why Ryan Grubb is gone. I thought he was going to be a solid play caller. And granted, I guess he is just that. But it's not enough for this particular offense at this particular time. So, hey, man. All right. Christian Watson would be given the designation of having a torn ACL that he suffered during the Packers-Bears match on Sunday. He will be out for the season. Another grave loss for them heading into this game. The Bears were set to interview Mike McCarthy as Jerry Jones actually granted him the ability to let him be interviewed by other teams. So naturally, we know what's about to happen. The Colts would fire defensive coordinator Gus Bradley after their defense also completely collapsed this season, as they were a bottom 4 unit in total defense and gave up 25.1 points per game on average, while getting completely gashed in the rushing attack on their side as well. He assumed the role in 2022, and yes, they had lost some core contributors over that time, but there's still not an excuse there. And you would have Ezekiel Elliott signed with the Chargers practice squad. He was cut, obviously, and wanted to go and find a contender to bandwagon with during these playoffs. I guess it's going to be the Chargers. Bring in yet another running back. The Titans, earlier this morning, would take it upon themselves to fire general manager Ran Carthon after 2 seasons. Now, obviously, he stepped in for former general manager John Robinson, and granted, something had to happen after that nigga did what he did with A.J. Brown. He had to get fired. I understand that. In comes Ran Carthon for the next couple of years, and I think, honestly, the jury's still out on him. I feel like, again, the Titans have had this terrible season, and they are also in the, pursuit of trying to find a scapegoat, so I guess they're looking at Carthon. When you really think about it, they're not going to look at Callahan here. I mean, he called some fine games. It's not like he completely wet the bed in his first year as a head coach with terrible decisions or things like that. He called a fairly clean season. The execution was poor. So they weren't going to fire him. They had to look elsewhere. And when you look at his draft resume, I think the jury is still out on a lot of these prospects. It looks like Peter Skoronski and T'Vondre Sweat can be something. J.C. Latham still will need some work, and that's really the case everywhere else. I mean, Will Levis is obviously not the guy. Tajay Spears is fine, but you would still like to see a little more. Josh Weil, you would still like to see a little more. You haven't heard anything from the likes of Jalen Duncan, Colton Dowell, Cedric Gray, Jarvis Brownlee, Jaquan Jackson, James Williams, or Jalen Harrell, have you? So, again, to make that kind of move, I guess I do get it from one lens. One on the other, it may be a little too fast. I mean, to say that the drafting was an issue, yes, the misses are bad, but it seems like there are more overall uncertainties that you need to have a little bit of patience for rather than trying to make such a drastic move so fast and so early on in his tenure. So that's all I have to say for that. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.